Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. On behalf of the Northeastern University community, I'm delighted to welcome you to the Northeastern Fostering Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging in the Workforce Conference. We're absolutely delighted to have you joining us, and we're looking forward to really an amazing next couple of hours with some very talented and gifted speakers. What I'd like to do is make sure to kind of set the stage by saying to you that I think we're at an important inflection point. We have a real opportunity as individuals and as institutions to take a significant leap forward in addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Northeastern is very proud to be at the forefront of that. We have a large, diverse community of learners, faculty, staff, with campuses throughout the US, in Canada, and in the United Kingdom. And we feel a commitment, an obligation, if you will, to do all we can as a living, learning community to contribute to this important initiative. And we believe strongly in developing and creating an institutional ecosystem that supports not only our university community, but also the work of our many partners and stakeholders who work with us on these important initiatives. My organization, Employer Engagement and Career Design, is really focused on talent acquisition aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm really delighted to say that we have taken some important next steps in increasing the ability of our diverse students to access opportunities, to centralizing information about the various services available to them, in providing coaching and guidance to recruiting organizations and other partners that want to access the diverse talent that Northeastern has to offer. In fact, we've recently launched a new exciting initiative called NU Place that brings together these services and these opportunities, not just for our learners, but for our employer partners. I'm delighted to now introduce to you our keynote and a kickoff speaker for the conference today, Carl Reed. Now, I know Carl's bio has been available to all of you, so I don't want to take away from his valuable commentary by reading that again to you, but I do want to say this. Carl is an amazing professional. He has demonstrated throughout his long career a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not just a commitment, but intangible action steps that have made an enormous difference. We were delighted to have him join our community at Northeastern, and we have complete confidence and great enthusiasm about what we will be able to accomplish as a university under his leadership in this particular area. So I'm going to turn it over to Carl and remind everyone that a recording of this conference will be available to all the registrants, so you won't miss a single moment of the amazing content that's going to be shared with you this afternoon. I will see you later on in the conference, and at this point, I'd like to turn it over to one of our amazing colleagues, Carl Reed. Thank you, Carl.
Manny, thank you so very much for your generous introduction and kind words. It is really a pleasure to be a part of the Northeastern community. I could say I grew up in New York, born in the Bronx, grew up on Long Island, but I came up to the Boston area to attend college, and I spent almost 30 years here before moving to DC to run the academic programs for the United Negro College Fund, and then 7 years with the National Society of Black Engineers as executive director. And when I had the opportunity to engage in conversation about joining Northeastern, I did not realize that this institution, though I effectively grew up in its proximity, was as significant and agile as it is. I have spent a fair amount of time with college campuses, with UNCF, at MIT, Of course, my doctoral program at Harvard, visited probably about 40 or 50 colleges. I've never been to an institution that as agile and as creative, as innovative as Northeastern University. And this is not just hyperbole, but I have a great appreciation. And so when we engaged in a conversation about diversity, President Ayoun wanted something different. He did not want a traditional chief diversity officer, but certainly wanted someone who can bring who can speak across associative barriers, as Franz Johansson calls in his book Medici Effect. And I have industry experience, I have higher education experience, I have research experience, and an association, nonprofit, et cetera. So bringing all of that together, and that's welcomed here because Northeastern prides itself on ideas and innovation. In fact, David Madigan, the provost, says that ideas are the coin of the realm. And we are really approaching diversity in that way, using systems thinking, design thinking around the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. So what I'd like to do is share with you a kind of a model that I have introduced and began to have broad discussions across the university and with our partners, and show you why this is important. So start with the why this is important, and make the case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then how we're going to go about developing what we call this blueprint for inclusive excellence. Now, when I was with United Negro College Fund and I was appointed as their chief academic officer, I asked the Patterson Research Institute to quantify the effects of the leaks in the educational pipeline in the country. And so what I'd like to do is just share with you some of the results of that. This is based on 2010 census data, and it looks at cohorts of young people who are starting school. White individuals, white young children between the ages of 0 and 5. Based on the 2010 census, there were 2.6 million white children in the United States. And if assuming all of those made it to college, and we know that's not the case, but we're really doing some modeling, 85% of those will complete high school in 4 years. About 15% would not. So 400,000 in that case would not complete high school in 4 years. Some of them would complete high school later, but certainly not all right away. Of those who graduate high school, 67% would enroll in college, 33% would not, and then that they may kind of enroll later. And then 62% was the 6-year graduation rate for whites in the United States as well. So overall, about 35% of those who start high school would finish college in basically 4 years of high school and 6 years of college in 10 years, about 35%. For the Latinx community, that number really drops to only 27%. So of the million or so young people who are 0 to 5, only 27% of those would finish college after 10 years of high school, roughly. And for African Americans, the number even drops even further. Only 16% of those would finish. And so we're losing so much talent in the educational pipeline, across the educational pipeline. And this is a systems problem. This is not a black problem, a white problem, a blue problem, a green problem. This is a systems problem that we have to address in order to have the talent that we need for the workforce to innovate and to continue to create as well, not just in the United States, around the world. I'm hearing some feedback. I'm not sure if anyone else is as well. Just want to encourage everyone to mute their phone. So why is this the problem and so difficult? When in 1984, I was elected national chair of National Society of Black Engineers, and we were talking about the need for broadening participation, way back then, and we continue to talk about this. And the numbers have moved, but they've been lurching in terms of the completion rates and graduation rates, et cetera. And so the Race and Social Justice Initiative recently posted this description, and I've modified it a little bit, that talks about the differences between individual, institutional, and structural, systemic inequality or inequity. An individual they define as sort of us having sort of prejudgments, biases, and stereotypes about, and making generalizations about individuals as well. And that might be individuals based on race or ethnicity, based on body size, based on gender identity, based on their sexual orientation, etc. We have these biases. And the only way to mitigate those biases is having interaction, meaningful conversation, meaningful interaction. But we do, and some of those biases lead to our institutional biases. And so when individuals kind of come together, we establish sort of policies and practices and procedures. And in many cases, they're unintentional or inadvertent. It's effectively in the air. These policies and practices that exist, and they benefit white people and at the detriment of people of color. We all know that. We've heard this as well, and I'll talk about some of the sectors in our society that have kind of been the reinforcement of these institutional policies and practices that occur that benefit some at the expense of others. But then these institutions ultimately are built on an interplay of policies and practices and programs that run deep. In the United States, at least, it runs hundreds of years, and in many of the countries around the world, it's even longer than that in terms of these kind of structural dynamics that occur. And so you can understand that healthcare and housing and employment, a lot of the disparities that we see on criminal justice and education and voting rights, et cetera, are really kind of rooted in these structural inequities that occur. And frankly, a lot of the US Constitution was built on this. In fact, James Madison writes in 1787, the Federalist Papers, that the purpose of government is to protect the wealth of the opulent, right? It's to protect the minority of the opulent. And that's a large part of the Constitution that was built to kind of benefit certain people, unfortunately at the expense of others as well. And of course, the US system of the economy was built on a hundreds of years of free labor. And so many became wealthy, so many states, so many companies became very wealthy as a result of this free labor structure that was established over hundreds of years. So it kind of explains why you see the data that you see before, because these are kind of structural challenges, structural institutions that put in place to kind of reinforce this. Now, the good news is that we're having these discussions now. The George Floyd murder last year, the March 6th murder of 8 individuals in Atlanta, and 6 of whom were Asian American. We're having these discussions at the institutional level. We're having discussions like this today, and I'm hopeful that that's going to change our perspective as individuals and begin to dismantle sort of these structural dynamics that occur and reinforce these inequities that we see as a result. And so President Aoun, back in June, after George Floyd was murdered and the country was undergoing this reckoning about race and systemic racism as well, he makes the case that he was caught, and the university frankly was caught flat-footed, and that's his words. And so he operationalized an approach and a strategy that basically said, what are we going to do about it? And what are we going to do that's uniquely Northeastern? And so we put together these working groups to address these issues from what I call a multidimensional or systems approach to address and redress some of the challenges. Everything from representation at the student and faculty and staff level, to the relationships with the Northeastern University Police Department and building a community advisory board associated with, building in university-wide accountability around diversity, equity, inclusion, making data become more visible, and amplifying our impact through employer partners. And Manny talked about the NU Place initiative, and that came out of this effort as well. Actually, the effort had started by one of the speakers you'll hear from, among others, Anthony Wilder, but it was really, it became an institution-wide, university-wide initiative in the post-George Floyd era. So where are we doing? Where are we at as an organization? Part of this effort is setting bold new targets. I am a big fan of setting bold targets for organizations. And North Star is what Stephen Covey calls the beginning with the end in mind. And so fortunately, before I joined Northeastern, and really one of the reasons why I was so excited is that the target was already set. 2026. In the next 5 years, Northeastern would have a representative undergraduate, graduate, and faculty population across the network as well. And so we just published these dashboards to look at where we are at the undergraduate level by race and ethnicity, where we are at the master's level and the PhD against goals, not quotas, but against goals and targets. And we're working our way toward achieving a representative diversity across all of our levels and statuses at the university. But why is all this important? Why does diversity matter? And I'd like to have these conversations, right? Because my IBM sales training says, let's find out what the customer really wants and build a solution accordingly. And so I start off with the question, why is this important to you? Why is this important to industry? Why is this important to universities? Why is this important to communities as well? And for industry, it's earnings before interest and taxes, it's shareholder value, it's market penetration, it's all of those things that matter. And now, thanks to the work of McKinsey and the Boston Consulting Group and the Dahlberg Group and Scott Page and his work, we can all make the case that actually diversity benefits industry and universities and others. And it's not just because it's a good thing to do. It actually is an accelerant, or in the case of what Scott Page calls a bonus that's associated with diversity. And his two books really do quantify the effect on diversity, on innovation, on problem solving, and not just diversity of thought, which I think is a red herring or a smokescreen for a lot of diversity conversations, frankly. But he talks about the importance of diversity of identity. In other words, he makes the case that identity diversity leads to cognitive or diversity of thought, which leads to the outcomes we all know that are associated with it. The other thing that we've been beginning to have a discussion with is not only why is this important, but what's our North Star? What is our future state? What does an inclusive university look like? And more importantly, what does it feel like? What does an inclusive university, getting at the sort of our limbic system, we know what it feels like when we walk into a place when we're included. You know, the old, and some of us are old enough to remember the show Cheers. When you walked into Cheers, when Norm walked in, everybody says, Norm! It's just a welcoming place for one to be in. And when that happens, you're at your best in terms of your ability to perform, your ability to learn, your ability to execute, your ability to ideate, etc., your ability to problem solve. You're not using cognitive real estate to wonder if you're liked or you're being understood or you're accepted, etc. That's off the table. You're freed up to innovate, to think, to problem solve, to create, to learn, etc., etc. And the definition that I like for inclusion, which I think should be a North Star, and we're actually going to be going through a process here at Northeastern to define that North Star, but we're going to start with this whole conversation about that inclusion requires a simultaneous experience of feeling valued for your uniqueness and having a sense of belonging on your team. Again, that cheers experience. Norm, right? You're valued for who you are. You're not just a part of a group or reference group. You're valued for you as an individual. You're not just a religion, or you're not just a race, or you're not just a gender or gender identity. You are valued for who you are as an individual. And then as a result, you have a sense of belonging. But diversity is not inclusion, right? So we have to do more than just kind of getting the numbers up. We have to do more to kind of create a place in the workplace, as the McKinsey report kind of produces, writes in 2020, that the experience in the workplace that shapes whether or not you remain and thrive. And some of us just remain, we just survive. We're just kind of going through the paces. But what we want is for everybody to thrive, to feel like their sense of belonging, their value for their uniqueness, and that they feel a sense of agency that they can contribute to the workplace, and or to the classroom, the laboratory, etc. So I love this quote by Sir Edward Deming, who just, the management expert, Six Sigma, most of us know about that. His quote says that every system is perfectly designed to produce the results it gets. So the engineer in me says, if we want to change the results, we have to really address the system. And I talked about the 3 different levels of racial inequity or inequity. We have to kind of work on systems change. And so we've been toying with and playing around with a systems change approach. In fact, prior to joining Northeastern, we developed the systems change approach with the National Society of Black Engineers, and have shared this with over 40 partners, university partners, industry partners as well. And it generally resonates because it approaches this not just in one-off solutions, but it approaches this from all kind of aspects. So I want to walk you through what I call the steps to this inclusion, getting to the goal, the North Star that's there. So it starts off with diversity. And what I mean by that, I'm talking about sort of representative parity at all levels of the organization. And by that representative parity, Northeastern is looking at where it operates on its 11 campuses across the network, and ensuring that faculty, students, staff over the next 5 years are representative of those communities, whether that's in Toronto, whether it's Vancouver, whether it's Boston, but also more broadly Massachusetts and the Northeast, et cetera, just representative parity. And Intel has done this very, very well. When Brian Kucinich announced the $350 million strategy, I believe in 2015, he talks about this representative parity for all of their operations, and they were very effective in getting to their goal ahead of plan in their operations as well. Secondly, so I wanted to kind of talk about sort of kind of why this is important. This is the McKinsey report that I referenced earlier that shows that diverse organizations have higher financial returns at the management and executive and the board level than those that less diverse. And this is not just about racial diversity. In fact, it's not about racial diversity. This is about ethnic and gender diversity as well. And there are 3 different reports that I recommend you take a look at that really make the case quantitatively to looking at. Now, those are correlations. So the most diverse organizations outperform their peers by 25% in terms of gender diversity, or 36% in terms of ethnic diversity. And you can make the case, yeah, that's correlation, that's not causation. But the study that was done by the Boston Consulting Group, and it was published in Forbes and a couple of other places, talks about innovation revenues. And those are revenues that were generated within the past 3 years of a new product or service that was launched. And so they looked at those revenues, and they looked at the diversity of the leadership team, and found that companies with above average diversity produce innovation revenues at a higher rate by about 19 percentage points than the less diverse partners in their industry. And earnings were 9 percentage points higher, And they discovered that the diversity was additive. The effect was additive, that the more diverse these leadership teams were in terms of racial, ethnic diversity and gender diversity, and this was based on 1,700 companies around the country, around the world in 8 countries. The more diverse they were, the more value they produce, innovation revenues they produce. And that's really no surprise, right? When you have differences coming together and solving problems and innovating, usually new ideas come out of the intersection of those concepts and those frameworks, those cultures as well. New ideas are born, what Franz Johansson calls the Medici effect. And the Medici family was behind the 16th century Renaissance, right? Bringing together all these different cultures and produces new things. And we know that from our disciplines. I'm a materials engineer. Material science and engineering is the Medici effect of chemistry, physics, and engineering coming together. And you can make the case that United States, in many cases, is a Medici, inviting people from all over the world and ultimately producing the kind of innovation that we see day in and day out. But diversity is not equity as well. And I call the difference between equity, and I use Thomas Kochman's definition here, it's not equality. We're not asking for equality of where everyone gets the same inputs. It's actually the equality of effect, where there are variable treatments to assure equivalent effects. So we recognize that people are, again, valued for their uniqueness. And we are meeting their needs at their individual levels so that they can produce, kind of maximize their outputs as well. So that's when we talk about equity. It's things like eliminating biases and addressing training programs and outreach programs that are unique to different individuals, but also eliminating inequalities as well. So it's not just walking away from inequalities. When there are inequalities with regards to tenure and bonuses, a couple of years ago, my alma mater did a study that looked at the lab space and the salaries of female faculty versus their males, and discovered they were wholly lacking. I mean, and so they started to work on strategies to close those gaps, publish the results, close those gaps. So making sure that policies and procedures do not benefit some at the expense of others. Here's an example of David Thomas, who's now the president of Morehouse. When he was at Harvard Business School, wrote a paper called the Two-Tournament System, The Truth About Mentoring Minorities. And he talked about this, and he studied hundreds of executives at the senior levels and those who had plateaued, who are white and other minorities. And he discovered that depending on your race, your acceleration into the company was at a different rate. Right, and so it's fascinating. He talked about these 3 stages that white peers earn faster promotions into middle management. Once identified, minority peers were kind of encouraged through their sponsors and mentors, etc., and ultimately kind of moved up their careers at a faster rate than those original white peers, and ultimately they converge usually about 12 to 14 years out in their career. But unfortunately, too many of those minority managers would plateau when they see their white peers promoted and they were not. And they sort of kind of threw up their hands and left or gave up on developing those skills. And so here's an example of sort of an equity approach, looking at who's getting promoted and when by race and ethnicity and gender, and just looking at the data, just being dispassionate about it. The third step is to focus on the ecosystems. And that's the communities, the relationships with the communities we serve, the suppliers, the supplier network, the subcontractors. Can we do something a little more intentional to ensure that there's diversity among the supplier network? More intentional about when you have philanthropy, who are you giving to? Are you giving to just the CEO's favorite targets and the executive leadership team's favorite targets? Are you applying philanthropy where it really matters? where there are inequities. What's your policy agenda look like? And can your policy agenda work on dismantling some of these disparities as well? Building partnerships with organizations like the National Society of Black Engineers and Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, and historically Black colleges and universities or tribal colleges in the country as well. Building new and strategic partnerships. It's funny, I gave this talk to one individual, and I said, you know, part of this strategy is asking from where are you recruiting? You say, you know, you can't get talent. There's not enough a pipeline of talent coming into your company. Where are you recruiting? Well, most companies tend to go back to recruiting from where the CEOs or senior leadership team attended. Now, we're grateful for the partnership for the 3,000 or so more corporate partners that Northeastern has because, again, a unique approach to applying experiential learning as well. But kind of thinking through kind of where those partnerships occur and how do you build those. That's the ecosystem. And finally, the penultimate one is data. Making sure data are available and also holding people accountable to the results in that data. So here at Northeastern, we're looking at how do we do relative to the representation of Blacks and Latinx communities and Asian American communities in Massachusetts and the United States. And so part of our effort is, again, when we talk about representative diversity, we're saying what percentage of people of color are here in Massachusetts, and how are we doing relative to that? And if we're not even measuring up to Massachusetts, certainly not the United States, then we've got some ways to go. And so making data available, here are the data on students, here's the data on employees, so this is faculty and staff, and we're looking at this and eventually want to build this into our own evaluation. How do we ensure that people are giving attention to this with regard to their annual evaluations and their promotion considerations, et cetera, et cetera. And we're looking at ways to incorporate those into everything we do. The last area is inclusion, and I left this for last because, as I mentioned, diversity, equity, ecosystems, the data, all those are a means to an end to get to creating an inclusive environment. It's around the culture change. I wanted to call this climate change, but somebody pushed back on this. But it is really about culture. And so great organizations, best practices are implementing compulsory anti-racist training. So it's not, what this means is it's not good enough to be a non-racist. Most people would argue I'm not a racist, right? But what being an anti-racist is I'm actively working to dismantle the systems that I talked about earlier, to address them and to redress them. I'm actively looking to challenge my own implicit bias. We all have it. The Kirwan Institute says it's an equal opportunity bias. We all have biases. So what we are working on, ways to interrupt the natural process for a stimulus to lead to a response and say, wait a minute, I should be looking for a different kind of person to hire rather than someone who reminds me of myself, right? Which is an automatic process. It's called homophily. It's an automatic process to prefer people who are like us. Another area that I've been fascinated by, and we're kind of looking at kind of rolling out, is implicit bias and implicit bias training. And here's a really good definition by Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt, who talks about this, that it's so unconscious for a lot of us. In fact, only 2% of our decisions are emotional decisions we're aware of. 98%, we just kind of automatically make decisions based on that. So when we hear somebody with a Southern accent, we make an automatic decision about their intellect. When we see someone who is overweight, we always kind of automatically make a decision, for example, about their discipline. So how do we kind of interrupt that process so that we are much more intentional about the decisions that we make. We use that part of the brain that we've been given to make strategic and executive decisions, rather than the limbic brain that automatically responds. And so at the end of the day, our North Star is inclusion. And so you remember that picture of the two different versions of equality and equity. They were all behind the fence. And what inclusion is get rid of that fence and allow everybody to contribute to the game and contribute it in their own unique way. And I recommend Bias, Jennifer Eberhardt, and Implicit Bias Review by the Kirwan Institute, KIRWAN. Fantastic work that's being done out there to actually train institutions like the police about the decisions that they make. But we're looking at that here at Northeastern. So I'm winding up on just to talk about our process. How do we go about this? Because everybody's doing a lot of work in diversity across our network. We have campuses, we have colleges, we have schools, we have units, we have departments, and everyone, I would say to a person, is leaning forward in this area. The challenge is, what my former mentor used to say, is there are a lot of flowers, but there's no garden, right? Not yet anyway. And so when we talk about a blueprint, it is putting together these flowers into some engineered design that'll get us to an impact. We can't confuse activity with impact. And so we're going to be using what is called a collective impact approach, where we bring together organizations like yours and members of the university community and members of the community, the local community, and certainly students, to really think about what is our North Star, what should our North Star be, what's our future state, what's our common agenda. So we agree to these things that we are going to be working toward. How do we measure shared measurement metrics? And then how do we contribute to this goal? So what every organization can do to contribute to the goal. And if you remember your physics lesson, it's basically effectively pointing all the vectors in the same direction to ensure maximum impact as well. So, systems problem requires a systems approach. That's our direction. And we are kind of looking at all of these areas: our inclusion, diversity, equity, ecosystems, and accountability, and really breaking down how are we going to do that as well. And the only way we could do that is to involve you as our partners, as involve our community members as well, to really think through what it takes to get there as well. And so here are a couple of really good resources. I mentioned Jennifer Eberhardt's book. I recommend people do take the implicit association test. It's online, it's free to see where your own biases are. I took it 20 years ago, and I realized I even had biases against certain races built in to me that I had to address and redress. The experiences of women and the emotional attacks, this publication by Catalyst was very fantastic. There's an emotional tax that comes. I talked about the cognitive freedom. There's emotional tax that comes from having to feel like you have to prove yourself as well. And so there's a suppression of one's ability, what Claude Steele calls stereotype threat, that one has to deal. And this publication does a really good job. NASB has done some work on women in engineering called Ignored Potential. And of course, Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is a recommended read, among others. Let me finish up in the time that I have. One of my favorite songs, I have a lot of favorite songs, but this was one of my favorite, Old Town Road by Lil Nas X and Billy Ray Cyrus. Actually, Lil Nas X wrote the song and produced it with different musicians, but he partnered with Billy Ray Cyrus, and what an unlikely pair, a gay rapper and a country western singer coming together. And I think for 19 months in 2019, it was at the top of the charts. The country music folks didn't know what to do with it. The rap kind of folks didn't know what to do with it because it was an example of this meta-chi effect. And so with that, I'll leave you with how my good friend Robert Sellers at the University of Michigan defines diversity. It's being invited to the party. Equity is when everyone gets to dance. Inclusion, and this is about the culture, is when everyone gets to contribute to the playlist. And then what I've added, belonging, is how you feel even after you've left the party. Thank you so very much for your time.
Hi, I'm Bob Blanchett. I'm part of the employer engagement team here. And first off, I just want to thank Carl for that presentation and really setting the stage for today's program. So thank you very much, Carl. Very much appreciated. Kicked us off in a great fashion, so thank you. So I have the kind of the housekeeping part of today's agenda. So I just wanted to remind all of the folks that coming up next at 2 o'clock after a short break will be our student panel. So that's going to be great. And by the way, we're going to have periodic 10-minute breaks throughout the day. I know it's a long time to spend with us this afternoons, but hopefully we put in those comfortable breaks at the right time. Following our 2 o'clock student panel, we'll also be convening at 3 for our employer panel, which, as you all know, we have some great representatives of some really wonderful organizations at 3. And then at 4 o'clock, we'll be wrapping up today's events with closing remarks by Bob Athwell from Skyscanner. So that kind of walks us through the day. And one reminder, I know Manny mentioned this at the beginning, and thank you to Manny too for your opening comments, that we are recording today's event. So that should be available up and on our website within a day or two. So if there are times where you have to kind of break away from us, we completely understand. But please know that you won't miss anything because you'll have the recording available. So again, I want to thank all of the attendees. We have over 900 people out there spending their afternoon with us, which is wonderful. And I want to thank you all for doing that. And we really hope you enjoy today's program and that we all walk away a little bit richer from it. So thank you very much. We'll see you at 2 o'clock for the student panel.
All right, we are returning back. Hopefully you had a nice little break, but we are going to continue with our panel. Good afternoon or good morning, because I know people are calling from all over the U.S. My name is Anthony Wilder. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm the program coordinator in the Office of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion here at Northeastern University. We are very excited that you are joining us not only for the various activities that we're having throughout this afternoon and throughout this day, but also just the opportunity for us to share student experiences with you. So we're jumping into the student portion of this panel where we'll hear from 4 current students representing different colleges, different journeys, and different points of their undergraduate and graduate careers. And so I will start off by turning it over to Erica, and I will let them all jump in and introduce themselves.
Hello, my name is Erica Noda. I'm a rising 3rd year at Northeastern. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm studying communication with a minor in speech language pathology and audiology, and I'm very excited to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Yasser Aponte. I'm a 5th year Northeastern student studying international affairs and religious studies at Northeastern University. And I use the he, him, his pronouns.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. My name is Kennedy Azuma. I use him, his pronouns. I am a 1st year graduate student at the Curry College of Computer Sciences, and I'm studying computer science, and I'm very happy to be here this afternoon.
And hi everyone, my name is Emerson Victoria Johnston. I am a 3rd year in the College of Social Sciences and Humanities, studying philosophy, politics, economics, history, culture, and law, with minors in communications, criminal justice, and military science. I'm super happy to be here, and my pronouns are she, her.
Thank you all. So we're going to jump right into the questions that we have for our panelists today. So our first question we have is, as you think about your co-op opportunities and or your post-collegiate careers, how do you evaluate a company's true commitment to diversity versus it being a diversity checkbox?
Sure, Anthony, I can go ahead and give some thoughts. I think for me, the biggest signs are actually seeing diversity reflected at the higher levels of the organization. So having people at the executive level who, come from a variety of backgrounds, are, have different life experiences and truly reflect the type of messaging that the organization is putting out. I think that's important because corporate strategy and policy really develops and is directed in a top-down manner. So I think having people at the higher levels who can really champion those conversations truly shows that this organization is trying to really put into practice what it's saying.
I'll echo what Kennedy just said. I think that is exactly what I look for when it comes to co-op employers and just any type of internship employment. If I see myself in their corporate structure, that is a huge indicator that I will feel included there. I think another thing that I pay attention to is how the senior leadership talks about diversity and perspective. I've had employers sit in a meeting with 12 cisgender white women of an upper class just background and said, hey, look, we can have this conversation because we need to get this task done, but we need to bring in diverse voices. And I'd never seen an employer do that before. And I was really grateful to her. And so seeing that and hearing that language is really important to me as well.
I'll also say I like to see employers operationalize what they talk about. So, for example, at one of my employers, the food project, they began to implement land acknowledgements before farming or before certain activities on the farm. And we took it a step further to saying we should not only support our indigenous and native people through land acknowledgements, but provide pipelines to help out those type of communities, whether it's donating food, employing people from those communities, and so on and so forth. So just real practical and tangible changes to help those communities that are being served, rather than, like you said, just filling out a box, a checks in a box that says we did the land acknowledgement and that makes us more diverse. So really operationalizing what they are trying to succeed in.
I definitely echo everything that's already been said. I also really look for like a history of definitive action in the case of like cases that come up. So if something were to happen, I really would like to see the organization or company be very transparent about what they're doing and communicate with the employees about the changes that they're trying to implement in order to avoid future situations such as this.
Thank you for those responses. So you've talked a lot about how companies and corporations can really ingrain this work into their missions, into how they work with each other and things like that. But I'm also curious about how some of these companies and how you've experienced these different challenges. And so my next question is what challenges have you experienced with regards to your identity? And just feel free to share what identities you're comfortable sharing. And really think about this in comparison to career advancement. So this could be within your co-ops, this can be in co-op placements, this can be any kind of employment history experiences that you've had. So I'm leaving it pretty broad for you to talk about any of those experiences you've had in relation to your identity and career advancement.
I think this is a great question, and I'll start it by saying I am Native as well as Latinx, and I am a lesbian, all three of which are identities that can and are often hidden to people who don't know me, and I recognize the privilege that that comes with, being recognized as white, being recognized as straight. But the flip side of that in the workforce is sometimes people don't know who's in the room. And they don't really understand who you represent and the places you come from. And so the concept of coming out in the workplace, both racially and sexually, is a huge thing that I've dealt with in all of my internships and co-ops at Northeastern, just with regard to just working in the political science realm. I find that that is the biggest challenge because you never know what someone actually thinks. I think with race, it's a little bit easier because people have been taught to fill those quotas. They have to promote diversity whether or not they like it. But when it comes to sexuality, it's a lot more taboo than I'd like it to be at the very least. So I have really leaned on my co-op advisor and my own personal mentors here at Northeastern. And they've helped really guide me in those situations, especially when it's been at least adverse in certain situations. But I have definitely gotten through it with the help of my mentors.
I can say for me, in my experience, something that has been difficult in the workplace has been my aesthetic in the workplace, as well as my speech in the workplace. So just some context about me. I'm originally from Dorchester, Massachusetts, an urban place where a lot of times our vocabulary, or at least my vocabulary and the environment that I was brought up with, isn't as extensive as big professional words that are used in the workplace. So I noticed that sometimes the way that I talk or the vernacular that I use is not as streamlined as my peers or colleagues in the workplace. So that kind of sets me apart from them. As well as I was saying in the former, is my aesthetic, whether it's my hair or my dress code. Similarly, because of my upbringings in Dorchester, we weren't always wearing professional attire, whether that's a dress shirt, a tie, slacks and whatnot. We're, at least me in my upbringing, I was used to just wearing a lot more casual fits, you know, t-shirts and shorts, a lot of like athletic wear. So it's really been difficult for me to shift my upbringing and kind of the things that I was used to in my childhood, and now try to portray myself in a more professional way with proper, again, attire, or choosing what jargon to use at the workplace or at different settings and whatnot. So that's been really hard for me to navigate while I work. But just like Emerson said, hopefully things can get better with workshops like these as more people grow and learn to not judge others and just take productivity as it is. I think you're muted, Kennedy.
Oh, sorry about that. I was saying that this is a great question, Anthony, and I'll start off by saying that I identify as Black. I have Nigerian American heritage, and I think in the corporate space, the challenge that comes with that is having to code switch, right? So I have this culture, this part of me that's you know, that's different outside, and you know, within an organization, you sort of have to as a Black person, you sort of have to mold yourself to reflect, you know, the dominant culture, which, you know, oftentimes is not my own. So I think having to juggle two different identities or two different, you know, ways of communicating, expressing myself within the workplace and outside of the workplace is definitely a challenge. And then something that I definitely experienced, and I'm sure many people with backgrounds similar to mine experienced last year as well, was being, you know, the Black person in the room when something difficult is going on socially, right? So last year we saw, you know, the murders of George Floyd and, you know, other incidents of police brutality. And I think the challenge that comes with that, being a Black person, is, you know, you have to almost carry on, or you're expected to almost carry on as like nothing happened, right? So you're showing up at work, and you know, you have a lot of you know, trauma that you're experiencing and you're seeing, and you know, you have these events that are going on outside that are affecting you, but you don't really have the tools or the environment to, you know, really communicate and express, you know, how you're feeling in the workplace. And I think you know, because this is such a difficult topic, oftentimes it's not broached, it's not brought up, and you know, there's just that lack of, you know, communication and support. So I think that's one of the challenges that I and people similar to me face.
And then I guess bringing up the rear. So I am a female and I identify as female. I am also 5 feet tall. So that some people don't really think of as like identity, but it is one of the first things that people notice when they see me, is that I look really young. And kind of like the intersection of those two things is that people really have, I think when they see me, I don't think that I'm taken as seriously. And so I've always really struggled to be, to have my voice heard in like, especially like larger groups or meetings, and to be taken seriously and to let my like ideas be heard. It's something that I've also grown up with, struggling kind of feeling like confident enough in my voice, because I'm often, you know, I feel like sometimes looked over and not taken seriously again. And so I think it's really important to notice that each individual factor of a person really goes into making who they are, like in a complete sense. And it's really important to take the individual things that make each person, you know, themselves into account.
Thank you all. And just for our attendees, definitely feel free to drop any of your questions for our students in the Q&A section, because there will be some time at the end for that. So we're going to shift gears to our next question. You all kind of talk about a lot of the different identities that you hold, but then also how are you balancing that in these environments? And so my next question really deals about resources. And so this question is what resources were lacking for you within either co-op or postgraduate employment? And if you haven't had that experience yet, what resources are you hoping to be there in order for you to thrive?
I would say that for me, some resources that I wish our co-op classes had were how to deal with conflict in the workplace. And what I mean by conflict in the workplace is mainly microaggressions. So I spoke earlier about, my speech or my different attire and whatnot. And a lot of times my colleagues, when they would see me with a certain shirt, whether it had a graphic that they agreed with or not, or whether they, really couldn't understand what I said and would say, I'm sorry, can you speak up or something like that? Or just my workplace etiquette, whether, I had music in the workplace while I worked on something, I would get these snide remarks where people would kind of look over me because they didn't acknowledge kind of, again, what I was wearing or what I was listening to or something like that. So I wish in terms of co-op classes, they kind of had a section to kind of learn about conflict at the workplace and how to manage that conflict, how to talk to a colleague about, hey, I felt uncomfortable that you just looked over me and didn't acknowledge me as a human being for any type of reason. Can we please discuss this? Or even if it gets to the point where it's, of bigger magnitude, how do I go up to a leadership team or an executive team and express to them the type of microaggressions that I'm dealing with on a daily basis so that the work environment and culture can be better overall. So that's something that those type of conversations and conflicts I wish I had better understanding of.
Yeah, to kind of go off of that too, these conversations are like extremely difficult to have. I know like whenever I try to talk to someone, I start like shaking and get really nervous and everything. So the kind of my like biggest dream would be to start practicing having these conversations earlier. I haven't myself done a co-op yet, but I'm about to start one next week. And I think something that the university could do to make that transition into your first co-op easier is to be maybe even start during like the freshman seminar course, practice with these kinds of dealing with like the workplace dynamics and speaking to people in positions of power and the words that you should use and maybe like techniques for how to get everything down, because I mean, doing this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. These things and conversations really take time to be comfortable with.
I think for me, something that's lacking in the co-op curriculum is the, I guess there's too much of a focus on the impermanence of co-op, which is helpful when we are doing co-op. But as a first generation low-income student, I can't even conceptualize a job after graduation that doesn't end, or at the very least lasts longer than 6 months. And I think that maybe in the co-op class that succeeds your first co-op, because we have two, one that comes before and one comes after, I think something that we should pay attention to there is how these experiences differ from the jobs we apply for as we graduate or after grad school, because some of us don't have the same safety net. Some of us can't just go home afterwards. Some of us have to immediately start working. And that is such a daunting feeling, knowing that I'm going into my senior year. So I'd love to see that more in the co-op curriculum.
Sure, I can definitely go ahead and share some perspective. So to share some context, before coming to graduate school at Northeastern, I worked for a few years in the construction industry, and a support resource that I definitely wish I had and do look forward to having after my experience here at Northeastern is being part of a company that really champions and has an employee resource group, which is also called an ESG. So employee resource groups are just identity-based groups for employees to really come together and build a sense of like community, or champion any types of measures or just really anything that would be important to their community. So I think especially in STEM fields, visibility is a problem for minorities, women, people of color, Black people, especially Black women. And I think having an employee resource group is a really great way to have a sense of community amongst those minority employees or people from underrepresented backgrounds in your workforce, in your company, who don't see other people that look like them often. I think that helps build a sense of connectedness and belonging in the organization. So I would encourage any corporate people here that are currently tuned in to to consider setting up employee resource groups and see what type of positive benefit that may have for people in your organization.
Thank you all. And just to provide some context for perhaps folks on this call who aren't aware, so Northeastern is unique in that we have this co-op opportunity. And so what this allows our students to go out into the working world for somewhere between 4 to 6 months in their desired career during their undergrad, and they're getting paid for that opportunity. And it's really a great opportunity for them to kind of get their foot in the door and really do that career exploration in a way that, an internship doesn't quite do, or perhaps a study abroad might not do in that same way. And so that's what's really unique, and I think a big draw for a lot of our Northeastern students. So I just wanted to provide that context for people who may have not heard that or knew what that was. And so a couple of you have already alluded to my last question, which is great. That means you're in my head. But before I read the last questions, I really want to acknowledge the call to action set by President Ayoun back in October of 2020. And I really want to highlight a piece of the call to action that pertains to the work that we're doing today. And this falls under amplify our impact through our employer partners. Within that, he talks about how we're going to be really working with key employers and talking about that career retention, recruitment, and advancement for our students of color and other folks who are from historically marginalized identities. But understanding that this relationship is not just a one-way street. So we are always encouraging our employers to think about best practices for their organizations, because we would love to make sure our students are having the best co-op experience or postgraduate experience, right? But it also then has to come back to us as an institution. And I think this is where some of you have been talking about. And so I really want to know is, how do you and your peers need to be supported from the institution? Some of you have already kind of started talking about that, but if there's more insights or more ideas that you all have in terms of how can the institution really support you in making sure that you are being the best employer and best employee possible, and really just being able to go into the working world with all the confidence.
I can, oh, sorry, yes, sorry. As the incoming co-op for the Northeastern's New Place initiative, I mean, I'm so excited about this new initiative. It's still kind of brand new and a baby, but I just see a great future for it. For those of you who don't know, New Place is a new thing that Northeastern is starting to connect, like, traditionally marginalized students with job resources. And I think that it's great what they're doing. And because it's a new initiative, of course, you're not going to expect to have all of the resources laid down yet. But kind of in my time that I've been here, it's been, kind of bittersweet, because I've seen the turnover of a lot of faculty. And I think something that we're really pushing for is a permanent member of the team, in order to have kind of someone who's, got a little bit more insight other than the students into the institution. and to provide some guidance maybe for us students. I would really love to see maybe them expand this into like an actual workspace office that had full-time employees.
I'd love to just echo what Erica said. I'm also part of a new place, and I know that one of the challenges with having a new program in place is really having that higher up advocacy. So I do hope that the efforts of this organization, this new fledgling organization, can definitely be rooted and just ensured for the future through that office. And something else that personally I have enjoyed in my short time here at Northeastern so far is the amount of, I would say, programming that's really dedicated to bringing students in touch with professionals around various like topics of interest. Like, to give you an example, yesterday there was a Black professionals in tech panel where students were able to interface with professionals in the industry, professionals who came from similar identities and similar backgrounds, and were able to field questions to them. And I think having more programming around the different types of identities that exist within the Northeastern community, and allowing people from those different identities to interface with people like them who are in industry is a really great way of telling students that, hey, here at Northeastern, we're really invested in getting you, work experience, and look, these are people who have gone through our system, gone through our pipeline, and are thriving and are being successful, and we want you to connect with them. So I would love to see more of that.
I would say one place I would like to see Northeastern go from here is if they can have NU Place kind of hold workshops with the employers that we have available to select in co-op. And the reason I say this is because at least I had 2 co-ops in Northeastern, and both of them I worked for predominantly white institutions. And there's just a cultural dynamic when you're a person of a marginalized community and you go into a workplace that's predominantly white. There's a lot of lessons and intangibles that you have to learn as you go. And I think it would be really nice if Northeastern can hold, like I said, activities, workshops, councils, whatever it may be, with the employers, these co-op employers, and have a representative from these underrepresented communities, and kind of tell them and give them the inquiries or questions that we go through in the workplace, so that these co-op employers kind of know how certain folks think when they come into the workplace, and how they can adjust and accommodate them better once they're at the workplace. So that's somewhere I would like to see this push forward in the future.
No, I think, Yasser, you make a great point. I think working with employees directly is huge. I think another huge, aspect of this is modifying, or at the very least expanding, the co-op curriculum to talk a lot more about identity than it does now. I did my co-op class last fall, and my professor was amazing. She's a mentor to me in a lot of ways, but there were 2 people of color in the class, and we didn't talk about how our experiences would be different, how sexual identity would play a role, how I could vocalize my concerns in those realms without jeopardizing my job, or at the very least how I could feel comfortable enough doing that, even if it did. I think that the curriculum in those classes should directly cater to students in marginalized communities, because we go to a predominantly white institution, but we also have thriving communities of color and LGBTQ spaces. And I think that those students should not be left with those questions at the end of co-op class. Like, it's fine if we don't know how to do taxes, but those particular questions are really important to have been answered before we start.
Those are really, really great insights, and I thank you all for being vulnerable and sharing that with our audience today. Just to provide some context for our attendees, so NU Place has had a soft launch in the last year. It really started as an initiative to take some of our existing identity-based career development programming to our regional campuses. But to COVID, we actually had an opportunity to kind of slow down and really think large scale about how can we really truly make something that is intentional and much bigger and can impact everyone as a part of our Northeastern community. And so in this past year, we've done some of our beginning steps in terms of having our inaugural co-op folk, one who is on the call today, but in the back of the scenes, but Erica will be joining our team next week. So I'm very excited about that as the next co-op. We have also launched a coalition, which is about 10 to 15 of our campus partners who are involved in terms of really bringing the student voices to the table and really trying to get that work done and get cross collaboration programs going. And then last but certainly not least, our 4 student panelists today are part of our Student Advisory Council. And so they are also the voices of the students who are really driving and pushing this work to really be the work that we want it to be. So this is a few things that we've been able to do with NU Place. If you get to me offline, I can tell you the 2-year, the 5-year plan that I was a part of creating around this time last year. So we're just beginning, so definitely be on the lookout for that. So now we're going to shift to some of our audience questions. The first one is, what kind of support would you most like from an ally in the workplace?
I will speak to this strictly from the sexuality point of view, and I'll also say that this is my particular perspective. I know that there are people in the community who believe otherwise, but I think something that's huge, especially during Pride Month, is recognizing your place in the celebration of others. Sometimes during Pride Month, people think it's this fun party with rainbows that's just for everyone, and it is, but it's also to celebrate not everyone. It's supposed to celebrate LGBTQ members and voices and to amplify the marginalized people in that community. And I feel like recognizing your place as an ally is really important. It's also really hard. So just trying to do so and recognizing and adapting when you do it wrong is really important to me.
I would say in the workplace, I find allies with genuine interest. So I really like when a colleague or a peer of mine come up to me at the end of the day or the middle of the day, just ask me, how are you doing? How is everything going? Or how can I help you? How can I best support you? And I think those like genuine questions really go a long way to building relationships. And the more people that actually care about your well-being in the workplace, the easier it is to kind of form a bridge between different socioeconomic and cultural lines, just showing empathy to one another and actually caring about one another, aside from just letting your peers do the work and not really caring if they're struggling or not.
Sorry, do you want to go ahead, Erica? Okay, I'll go. I definitely want to echo everything Yasser just said. I think empathy is definitely important, and how are you can go a long way into helping someone who feels as if their issues and their struggles just aren't heard. And then another thing that I think is important too is recognizing that as an ally, it's sort of your responsibility to educate yourself on the experience of the community and, the person that you want to help and you want to be an ally for. I think oftentimes there's this expectation that, in addition to, managing whatever struggle it is that a person may be facing, they also have to performatively like express and communicate what they're going through for others, and that constant cycle can get really very exhausting. So I think doing a little bit of pre-work to really try your best to understand what it is for that person, and then also just showing interest in how they're doing.
And also, I think, with each person being so individual in their personal identities and everything, I think the best way to show support is to ask them what kind of support that they need. Because I think that sometimes what would help one person won't help another. So really to get that individualistic approach to each person will show that empathy piece, will show that you're listening and everything. I think it's really important that people, get the feedback personally.
Thank you. And so my next question is kind of related to that, and I think a few who have already alluded to this as well. I think last year was a very turbulent year for a lot of us, and in doing that, a lot of us were asked to still maintain normal operations in the light of, and quite honestly, the world being on fire, and literally and figuratively. And so in your experience and just thinking about the support that you might need, what would be an appropriate way to support an individual who identifies as a race that has been recently targeted? And we can also open that to not just be race, but it can be gender, sexuality, however you want to define that. So again, that question is, what would be an appropriate way for somebody to support an individual whose identity has been recently targeted?
So I am mixed race of white and Japanese. And so as an Asian American, last year was a little bit of a scary time for me at certain phases of the pandemic. But I'm lucky enough to be white passing. And so really I didn't have too much trouble with that. But I do know that plenty of other people, were even killed for being Asian American. And I think that oh my god, sorry, I just totally forgot the question. Oh, as to be to support someone who is recently targeted. I know the mask issue was a really deeply political thing in America, but in Asian countries, it's disrespectful to get other people sick, and so wearing masks was already a big thing in that in the culture. And so I think a lot of Asian Americans are still wearing masks and still choosing to do that. And I think recognizing that it's their personal choice, it's not something that's hurting you. It's not something that's affecting you negatively. If it were doing that, then maybe say something. But if it's something that's really not affecting you in any way, maybe let them do what they need to do to feel safe in their community and in their environment.
I definitely want to echo Erica's response, especially her response in the earlier question when I believe, Erica, you said that the solution is different for every person. It's really good to just ask and ask an individual and say, how can I help you? What can I do for you? And so I think that's definitely one way to go about it. And then depending on whether you are a manager in an organization or someone higher level, I think also recognizing as Anthony said that it's a bit too much to expect this person to be their best selves and do their best work with everything that's going on. And I think giving them that grace and considering whether even asking them to take the day off or take some time to process everything and come back and perform. I think that really shows allyship and a true understanding of what they may be experiencing.
Something I'll add is, for me, I'm one of the only Native people that most of the people in my life know. And so when that particular community is targeted, I'm often thought of as this kind of resource bank for all things Native, including the situation that happened. And so I think in that particular realm, if a particular race or identity has been targeted, take it upon yourself to learn about the situation and its history before going to, the nearest similarly identified person and asking them, because odds are they don't know as much as you think they do, just about what happened, because you can read the same things that they can. And so I would pay attention to how you can teach yourself things before asking others.
Yeah, and I would just echo what the rest of my peers said, is just ask the individual, how can we best support you? I think it's on an individual basis how we react to certain things. So, it all depends on what that individual person needs during that time that they're not feeling their best, whether it's time off, whether it's time of solitude, everyone grieves differently. So it's all context based, really, and just care for them and really, I guess, take to what they say into account and really try to live up to helping them out during when they're down.
Thank you. And so as we start to wrap up this student panel, there's one more question left. I'll leave it to just have 2 responses just to be cognizant of time. And this question is kind of long, so also feel free to ask me to repeat it. Have you experienced ways in which microaggressions were handled in a way which were meaningful to both you and the employer that resulted in lasting positive change? What can employers learn from your experiences, especially with so much work shifting to virtual? So that's kind of a 2-part question. Feel free to answer any part of that. So the first one specifically talking about the aftermaths and meaningfulness around microaggressions, and the second one talking about learning from experiences of work shifting to virtual.
Well, I can tackle the latter part of that question. I haven't really had to deal with microaggressions at my workplace or confront anyone, so I don't have experience there to talk about. But in terms of what can employers learn, especially shifting to a virtual setting in the workplace, is really pay attention to the little things. So even when we're on Zoom or through a web-based environment, who's over talking another person, who's trying to make a point, and then someone else pops in and says, oh, and kind of disrupts them. Who, while somebody is speaking, is kind of looking at another side of the camera, looking at their phone while somebody's speaking. All of these kind of small microaggressions, they're all small details in our behaviors that you can tell that somebody's not respecting the presenter or acknowledging the person that's speaking. So really just paying attention to one's behaviors on camera, and then maybe asking them, hey, I noticed that when your colleague keeps on presenting or talking, that your eyes are somewhere else, or that you pick up your phone, or it seems like you're typing while somebody else is talking. Is there a reason that you're not acknowledging their presence or their voice? How can we get you to really, again, acknowledge and be respectful and courteous of everyone that's participating and that's involved in this Zoom call? So I think that's something that employers have to look out for, is the little details, and it's really hard. But once you kind of see those signs, you hold them accountable and see how can things change from there so everybody can feel involved.
I love that response, Yasser. And definitely just to piggyback off of what you said, I think in my response, I'm going to focus on the latter part of that question. I haven't really had an experience that worked out the way that the first question is presented, but I would say that inclusion is really important. Now that workplaces are distributed, teams are working in different locations. I think the challenge that comes with that is making people feel more included, especially your staff and your workers who have these different non-mainstream identities. I think in the traditional workplace it was difficult as it is, trying to make people feel belonged and included and respected. And I think in this distributed setting now, the challenge for employers is to to really see and think about how you can build a sense of community and have people feel that their work matters, that what they have to say matters, and I think that's really the challenge. Thank you.
And thank you, all four of you, for your great responses today. I just want to open this space up for the four of you to say if there's any last comments or last thoughts or last little bits of knowledge that you would like to share with us before we transition to our next portion of the conference.
I don't have anything to say, but I'm just really grateful to be here and to share this space with the four of you as well. And hearing your perspectives and insights has been really enjoyable. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that. And also, sometimes I'm always afraid that I'm not diverse enough to care about or work on issues concerning diversity. Just so you know, like anyone who cares, like please, like stand up and do your part, because it doesn't matter if you're not, identifying as like a marginalized group. Like just caring is good enough.
I would just encourage all of the employers to really operationalize their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. So whether it's celebrating different holidays, different cultures, doing potlucks to celebrate different foods, different team builders that may be cultural games, just really operationalize your interests and the change being done in the workplace. Don't let it just be that we're having an all staff meeting and talking about diversity. Actually do practical, tangible change at the workplace to really get a physical change going on to include and represent all types of people in every community.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying I'll echo yes sir the entire time, but he always says it on the nail, I guess. So thank you for having me. I'll just leave you with, if diversity is your priority, it'll be clear in what you do. Actions speak far louder than words. And I think that will always carry the work that I do.
All right, this was a wonderful student panel. I'm pretty sure we could talk to you all day and just, this is such a wealth of knowledge that you all shared with us. And so I truly appreciate you all being here. I thank our attendees for also being a part of this experience and sharing those questions with us as well. We are also now going to transition into a small break. So we'll give you roughly about 10 minutes. We'll start at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So this is a great time to stretch your legs, get some water, whatever you need to do, and then we'll be transitioning to our employer panel. So again, thank you to our four wonderful students joining us today, and thank you all for attending and listening to their great insight.
I'm testing the sound. Hi, Laura.
Sounded good and clear to me.
All righty, Danny.
And I presume you can hear me as well.
Yes.
Let's keep it muted, and we're live, so let's keep it muted until we come back from the session. Hello, everybody. Welcome back from break. I hope you had a few minutes to stretch your legs and you're ready for the employer panel. We have a pretty robust conversation for all of you today, so we're going to go right into it. Just to introduce myself, my name is Sumana Banerjee Northover. I am the Associate Director of the Talent Acquisition Team at Northeastern. We're a centralized team, which means we work across all of our various colleges, as well as our regional campuses to support our students in recruiting for full-time opportunities after they graduate, as well as internships. Our team also works very closely with our co-op colleagues, which is our signature program here at Northeastern. And we also work very closely with our XN colleagues, which is a project-based recruiting opportunity that we have for employers here at Northeastern. So welcome to all of the attendees, and welcome to all of our fantastic employer panelists this afternoon. Let's jump right into it. And the first thing that I'm going to have each of you do is, if you can just introduce yourself, so your name and your title, and I'm going to give you a question to start, which is, why is DEI important to your organization? And from the context of your role, why is DEI important? And the more specific your answers can be, with the more examples that you can give of specific situations within your organizations, the more beneficial the conversation will be. So I'll let any one of you jump in with that first question. So introduce yourself and why is DEI important?
I'll jump. Hi, everybody. This is Jerry Mason Hall with NetApp. I lead our DIMB, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging practice. My pronouns are she and her, and happy to be here and join you today. And for us, it's a growth strategy. So we are a medium-sized tech company. We're not one of the biggest. We partner with all the big names. We are a cloud-led, data-centric software company. Danny's familiar with us. But we're not well known, and yet it's a solid business, and we're growing. And so it is part of a growth strategy. It is part of a talent-first strategy to focus on diversity and inclusion. And so first and foremost, it's a business imperative. It is not just the nice thing to do. We're nice people for sure, but it is really about business growth. And Adrian, I saw you smile. I remember meeting you in DC. I just have to talk about that later. Sumana, did I hit on it? Was I responsive? Oh, thank you.
Jerry, thank you. Who's next? Go ahead, Adrian.
So hello, Jerry. It's good to see. Oh, I think it's Danny.
Danny, you're up.
Okay, can you hear me? Oh, I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad I'm up. It's great to see you all, and it's great to be with you. I'm Danny Best, and I lead a pillar called Ethnic and Cultural Empowerment in Global Diversity at Dell Technologies. And, you know, Jerry, it's funny because, yes, we are one of the large ones with over 165,000 employees across the world. Of course, we certainly need the NetApps of the world as well. And, you know, aside from, you know, the fact that diversity breeds innovation, you know, where, you know, inclusive companies are 1.7 times more innovative, or beside the fact that, you know, when diverse companies, you know, that are ethnically diverse and gender diverse have, you know, 35% and 25%, you know, greater, you know, profitability and returns, aside from all the bottom line, you know, implications of diversity, you know, I think there's a significant talent factor. And of course, those of us that are within the technology industry, you know, recognize that, you know, there's a talent shortage. And it's one of those things that we really have to grapple with. You know, one of the things I think about is the fact that, you know, our employee resource groups, you know, one of the things we look at is the engagement. And we look at this thing called the Net Promoter Score. We have an employee Net Promoter Score, and it's really an index that, you know, measures, you know, satisfaction. It measures engagement. It measures whether or not, you know, these employees will, you know, recommend Dell Technologies as an employer of choice to others. And, you know, our employee resource members have a 31% higher net promoter score than those that are not within employee resource groups. So aside from that, they also have greater productivity. They have lower attrition. So when you ask the question, Sumana, of the why, it's really as a result of, not just the business, but the talent issue that's associated with it. And to some degree, the why is it's about survival. You can't, most companies want to grow, they want to thrive. You can't do that without diverse talent. And you can't do that without a broad customer base. And you can't do that without partners. It really requires an ecosystem to address these challenges. So there's so many whys, and I'm sure the others will chime in, but it's great to be here.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Adrienne Alberts from the American Red Cross. So I will ditto Jerry and Danny, but I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach and tell you a little bit of a story. So the American Red Cross is probably known best for one of two things. Well, maybe three. You might have been CPR trained, and you might have taken a Red Cross course to get CPR certification or swim, right, lifeguard certified. You might have given blood. We're at a severe blood shortage right now. If you are open to giving blood, I encourage you to do that. Or disaster response. Something has happened in communities and the Red Cross has responded. And that's the story I'm going to tell you. Why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to the Red Cross. I had an opportunity a few years back to respond to a disaster in North Carolina. We were out making sure that communities had what they needed to respond immediately, right? So really thinking about what are my basic needs right now, because with flooding and damage, we knew individuals were going to have to assess and think about what their next steps would be. We recognized that not everyone was actually answering the door. Not everyone was actually engaging with our outreach initially. When we went back and assessed and kind of looked at the demographics of the communities we weren't connecting with, we realized what we didn't have in that first wave were our Spanish-speaking employees and volunteers who really, when we course corrected, right, and had those individuals out in communities, knocking on doors, talking to pastors, the community responded. The community saw itself. It heard itself. It saw that our commitment was to make sure that their lived experiences were important and that we would engage on that basis and that basis alone. For the Red Cross as a humanitarian organization, it is critical that we reflect the communities that we serve, because if we don't, we can't actually partner to serve communities. It will never be our goal to just show up in community and say what we do is more important than your lived experience. As Danny said, it all really happens in partnership. And that's just an indelible experience for me as to why it is critical that we create diverse, equitable, and inclusive organizations. And I'll just wrap up with this. I don't want to leave you to believe that as a humanitarian organization that we are also not a business. We are. And so we have the same talent needs. We have the same needs to make sure that we continue to innovate. But at our core, our foundation, we're a humanitarian organization, and reflecting communities is imperative to what we do.
Go ahead, Lance.
Hi there. I'm Lance Laverne. Am I live? I don't see my little live thing. Okay, here we go. I am the Chief Diversity Officer and Head of Global Talent Acquisition and Associate Experience at PVH Corporation. Most people have no idea what PVH is. They think it's that white tubing that you use for plumbing. But PVH actually stands for Phillips Van Heusen. We're a fashion and apparel company, and we are most known for our Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger brands. And so as a consumer-oriented, consumer-facing company, diversity inclusion, we call it inclusion and diversity at PVH, is absolutely critical to our very existence. And not from just a, we want to make money perspective, but we definitely want our products, our services, our experiences to resonate with people. We want people to feel good about choosing to engage with us for whatever reason, whether it's to volunteer at stuff, to go into one of our showrooms and stores, to put on our apparel. And so we want to meet the needs of a very diverse consumer base. In order to do that, it's a good practice to have people representing those segments in your organization, thinking about the ways to interact and engage with those consumer segments so that they resonate authentically. There are plenty of apparel company examples where you look at something that they put out there and you ask the question, did anybody look at that before they hit send? Did anybody? And we don't want to be that company. Not at all. And so there is a real, cultural dynamic within PVH, as well as a real business driver for us to make sure that we are inclusive and diverse in all the things that we do, in addition to what has already been shared by all of the panelists so far.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you can hear me. I think I'm live. I can't see a live thing, but okay, cool. So I'm Movell Dash. I am based in London, but I'm the global lead and head of inclusion for Unity Technologies. So I'm based over here in London. It's 8 p.m. So for us, there's nothing that hasn't been said already that we can't echo, because we have the same kind of issues and concerns and priorities as the people that have mentioned previously. But for us, it's also important that we recognize that we've created a community of creators across the world that use Unity Technologies and use our products. So it's really important for us that we are acting in a way that represents all of our users and that community. So it's really, really important for us that we take inclusion seriously, so that we are able to understand people's needs as users of our services and understand the needs of our individual people who work within Unity. So it's really just echoing everything everyone else has said, but it's really important for us that we get that right, because our users are everywhere. And not only are they our users, but they're creating products for themselves. And so we want to kind of be the example for what we'd like them to create, which is inclusive products. So we understand that our reach goes far beyond our internal organization. It goes to our users and their users. So for us, it's paramount that we get that correct.
Thank you, all of you. So in the course of these discussions around DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, I find that organizations are in various stages, okay, of where they are in their own infrastructure. So one of the things that my next question really revolves around organizations that maybe are thinking about, okay, we need a shift. How do we approach this challenge? How do we build an infrastructure? Where do we begin? Okay, many organizations don't have the resources of an infrastructure in place, and so they're really starting from the very, very beginning. So for companies that are starting from the very beginning of the process, where do you recommend leaders of those organizations begin when they're thinking about creating an infrastructure for DEI?
I mean, I'll start with that one, I think. I'll start by saying what they shouldn't do, which I've seen happen way too many times, is hiring the nearest brown or black person in your organization and saying, well, you must understand this topic, so you can do it. I would say if you're starting from the very beginning, you don't have that resource, go externally and get an expert. And by expert, I mean someone who has proven that they have a track record in this area, as opposed to people who think they understand it or are very passionate about it, but actually haven't achieved anything. So that's the first place I'd say you should start, is in getting that expertise and getting the right expertise for your organization. Because that's the other thing people do, is assume that it's a one size fits all, and it can't be. each organization has different needs. So I would say get the right expertise for your organization, and then start with your C-suite. Because if they're not committed to this work and doing this work properly, nothing's going to change. You can have people say, yeah, one person says, I'm interested, I'm passionate about this, but it has to be your entire C-suite. They're able to demonstrate their commitment across the board so that all of their direct reports and all of their direct reports are on board. So that's where I'll say I would start. There's much more, but I'll allow the other panelists to interject here.
Yeah. I would jump on that. Can we switch over? Yeah. So I would take a little bit of exception that don't overlook your internal talent, but you're spot on that who's the right fit for your organization, and all leaders can't affect the change. The second piece along those same lines is go to your data. Don't assume that you're going to lift and shift a program from some organization that made it to the top 10 of somebody's list, okay? So really start with your data. What is your problem statement? What are you trying to solve for in your organization? And so just a little quick example is that in contrast, I was in hospitality at one point in time, right? And there we had a huge underrepresentation of Asians, and specifically Southeast Asians at the top. Fast forward in the tech world, that is absolutely not the case. So when we talk about underrepresented minorities in the tech industry, we are saturated with Indians and representation from Asia. So there is that dynamic. Start with your data. What does that look like? We have to focus on bringing in more Black and Latinx talent, in contrast to where I was before. So again, starting from the top, as was said, and then going to your own data, still looking at best practices from others, but use your own data to drive your strategy.
I'll just, am I live?
Yeah, Danny, you can go ahead and talk. The live screen will get to you eventually.
Here we are. So I think Jerry and Mobel said it extremely well. You know, it's one of those things where you have to figure out where the organization is. You know, and I think a good step is to really, you know, start with that assessment and understand where you are from a representation perspective. You know, looking at all levels of the organization. The other piece that I think about is understanding where you are from the entire talent continuum. What are the trends that are happening? You know, what's happening from a hiring perspective? What's happening from a promotion, a development perspective? You know, what's going on with the culture? And most organizations and similar organizations like ours, we do employee engagement surveys to assess how individuals are doing, you know, from an inclusion, belonging perspective. And it's good to look at that information overall, but when you slice it and you segment it and you look at it, you know, by race, by ethnicity, by whatever, you know, diversity dimensions that you can track, I think that's where you start to understand where some of the, you know, some of the pain points are, you know, where the gaps are, where there are discrepancies and disparities. And so I think, you know, starting from there, just understanding. And then, you know, the other piece I think about, you know, once we go through, as Mobel mentioned, you get the right person and you understand the organization, then it's also communicating, right? Communicating to the organization the strategic rationale for why this is important and why are we doing this, so that, you know, not just the top understand, but the entire organization starts to really get mobilized to support, you know, those efforts because they align to the organization's, you know, strategy and the organization's goals. So those are some of the things I think about for organizations that are just starting off.
I want to add a slightly different dimension to the question, because all of the folks who have just spoken have talked about really important work that somebody needs to do. And sometimes organizations think that folks in this space are magical and they can turn 2 fish and 5 loaves and feed multitudes. It doesn't work that way. You have got to invest in these efforts just like you would any other business initiative in your organization. And so whether you're a company looking to start this or you're a practitioner considering an opportunity at an organization, there has to be a clear commitment in terms of funding and resources as well. So that to me is just as important as the things that we've talked about, because that's what's going to be required to do the things that everyone has mentioned.
I would just add to that just a quick few things. One, there are organizations that can help you with this diagnostic. Like if you haven't found the person and you're trying to figure out what the strategy is, there are organizations that can help you figure that out. So one, don't be afraid to invest, to Lance's point, to invest there and allow that to help you drive the right person for your organization. I'd also say in addition to data, talk to your workforce and not just survey them, right? Talk to them, have focus groups with communities in your organization, because they will give you the nuance behind those numbers. They will help you understand what they are expecting in an inclusive community and an inclusive organization. And if you don't know that yet, you can build a direction and have no one interested in following you. So I would highly encourage you to put some humanity behind those numbers so that you really understand what that information is telling you. And then just 2 other quick points. Pace yourself. This is more than a marathon. This is not a sprint. And if you go out quickly and focus on too many things, you will spin out quickly and you will not make progress. So pace yourself and be clear about that when you set those expectations. And as Danny said, as you are speaking to the community about what you're doing, be really clear about this being a continuum of what you will always be doing, as opposed to something that you are going to fix at a given point in time. And then my last piece is also, speaking to individuals who are doing this or leaning into this work. I encourage people to think about changing systems as opposed to changing minds. You can wear yourself out trying to convince people that they should believe something that they may not already believe. However, you can show people the path by changing the systems and creating outcomes. And so I am a fervent believer that everybody needs to really believe in this work, but I also recognize that you can create change in a lot of ways. And so think about the systems and focus there, as opposed to trying to convince people that they should believe something differently. Show them that the belief makes sense.
Thank you. Great answers. The theme that I heard in all of your answers, the thread is investment, right? Whether it's an investment in talent, whether it's an investment in expertise, investment in getting to the right data, investment in funding, it's an investment. And that's where the show versus tell comes into place. That's great. Thank you. Many of our attendees here today are from institutions just like ours, Northeastern, career services professionals, student support professionals, advisors, mentors. So this question is more bringing those specific stakeholders into the picture. So how do your specific organizations collaborate with educational institutions in cultivating diversity within the talent acquisition pipeline? Okay, and then the second part of that, if you could follow up and just give us a little bit about how do you measure those programs? How do you measure the success of those programs?
I could, go ahead, Jerry.
Go ahead,
Jerry. I deferred to the gentleman.
Well,
I yield.
Well, this is one that is really kind of dear to my heart, and part of it's because of the initiatives that we've had in engaging with academic institutions and organizations that have similar values in their value and their goals to increase the representation in the tech industry of Black, African American, Hispanic, Latinx individuals. As Jerry mentioned, it's a pretty significant issue for us in the IT world. We've been long aware of the need to increase representation of ethnicity in women in the industry. So one of the things that we've recognized is that the time is over when you can go on campus, set up a table with your company name and logo and expect the students to kind of flock to your company. So those days are completely over. And it's really about establishing a partnership. And one of the things that I'm proud of that we've implemented at Dell Technologies is an initiative called Project Immersion. And Project Immersion is a program that we've worked with the HBCUs and MSIs, historically Black colleges and universities and minority serving institutions, where we provide, those schools with Dell curriculum. We started about 2 years ago working in partnership with professors, with administrators, with deans, to provide the latest technology, curriculum and skills that the students need to compete in the tech industry and in digital enterprises. And they run the gamut. They could be full courses for credit. They could be workshops, seminars, webinars where students engage, executive roundtables where they could kind of sit around and have conversations with executives. And to date, we've done, some programs that include things like sales engineering or cybersecurity or data infrastructure or cloud infrastructure. And our latest module is data science. But what this does is that it gives these students an opportunity to oftentimes engage in a curriculum that they were just not familiar with. And then, the great part about it is the adjunct professor model, where the individuals that are actually, teaching the courses are Dell employees. So they're giving their time, they're volunteering, and not only are they acting as, teachers, but they're also, mentors and individuals that can guide, our Black and brown students, towards careers that are actually, life-changing, for these individuals. So we've worked with, Spelman, Morehouse, Clark Atlanta University, Georgia State University, Howard University, and we're actually building curriculum so that we could provide not just 4-year colleges, but also 2-year colleges with this curriculum, so that students can take advantage of it and give them the advantage when it comes to applying for internships or full-time positions. So that's one way we're working with it. And finally, I'd just be remiss if I didn't include our relationship with Northeastern University, where we are engaged in the Align program, where we have Dell scholars. And for those of you that may not be familiar, the Align program targets working adults that don't have a computer science degree, and it leads them towards a master's degree in computer science. So we also support efforts like that to really allow those individuals that may have been left out of the the technology loop back into that track. So those are just a few of the things that we're working very closely with universities on.
Go ahead, Jerry. Yeah.
She's on mute.
Bravo on those examples, and I really have to applaud. I'm relatively new to the tech world, so I'm relatively new to NetApp, but the combination, the organizations who have stepped in. You've seen a lot of the announcements around donations to HBCUs, but more importantly, from our perspective, are those examples that Danny gave, the partnering and collaboration with the universities to build that strength and influence the curricula so that we are building the talent for the future. Cyber security being one example he mentioned, we're all in there. And then another area that I'm very proud of is our Data Explorers program. And that is tapping in to K through 12. So that middle school sweet spot where they have no idea, where they want to go for the future, but introducing them to what data is about, how data can show up in so many things. And we think about it, the impact of having that information, kind of what Adrian was talking about in terms of disaster. But when we got into this pandemic, and we didn't really think about the communities we were serving and those who would be hesitant and those who, when it came to the vaccine, why one wouldn't want to get vaccinated. All of these things are informed by data. So introducing to young children these concepts and that they get more and more comfortable, the same way we started with STEM, decade or so ago. So those go hand in hand, and I'm very proud of that work. And we have a lot of volunteerism here at NetApp, as do many of the tech companies specifically, to introduce those communities who are less familiar and help guide them in their career paths.
Go ahead, Lance.
So our campus university recruiting at PVH is relatively small. We only have 65 interns this summer. 12 of them are co-ops, 3 of them are from Northeastern, I'm happy to say. So my perspective is informed more from my experiences at Wells Fargo and also going back to Golden, where I led diversity recruiting and we hired hundreds of students a year. There is certainly a component of your university recruiting if it's diversity recruiting where you need to go to HBCUs and MSIs, but folks go to a whole lot of different schools, and I don't know how many of the people on the call are representing HBCUs and MSIs. They're probably representing a much broader spectrum of schools. And so to make yourself an attractive option for companies that are looking for diverse talent in the campus channel, I think 2 things I would recommend is making it known that you have diverse talent available at your schools, so that employers, companies will put you in the realm of consideration. And you can do that in a variety of ways, through the relationships you have with your corporate partners, whatever, publicizing the diversity of your schools and your universities. But on the flip side, you also need to make sure that your talent is ready. It's hire ready when those companies come calling. And I think that's a service that career services, departments, whatever part of your organization or your school can really lean into. It is competitive for jobs, particularly really great jobs. Everybody wants them. And if you want to make sure that your student population is at the top of the consideration list, just like you want your school to be at the top of that consideration list, you should do everything you can to make sure that your students know the protocols, the ins and outs, the jargon, the language, how to show up, how to interact, how to engage, how to follow up. Those things have changed and they've ebbed and flowed over time, but there are still some basic fundamental things that candidates should do to distinguish themselves in the process. And as a school, if you can help your student population be excellent on those aspects, you will significantly enhance their chances of success in the process.
Thank you. Adrian, you're next, I think.
So I just want to follow up on something that Danny said and something that Lance said. But first, I just want to offer that from the Red Cross. So as a nonprofit, I'm the only nonprofit on the panel. I'm representing nonprofits on the panel. And I love the days, like, so I used to work for for-profits and in the defense industry, and I remember the days of sponsoring curriculum and really partnering to really change the face of learning on campuses. But as a nonprofit, I'm not sponsoring curriculum on a campus. It looks a little different, but we are on campuses. We are still engaged. So two things, your internship might actually look like volunteering at a nonprofit, right? So there's the reality of that. So I offer that. And for an organization like the Red Cross, we are probably on your campus building a Red Cross club or organization, investing in developing leaders on your campus and helping them connect to our mission, but also start to understand and develop their own personal mission. So there are lots of different ways that organizations might show up. So when you think about the broad diversity of employers that might engage on campus, there are lots of different ways that might look. So I want to share that. But I also want to point out this notion of partnerships. So Danny mentioned that it's about partnerships, and I agree. I had the real honor to start my career in career services before I transitioned over to the corporate side. And I remember what that meant to me then. Then I moved over and I realized what that meant to me once I was actually recruiting talent from universities. And my experience was we weren't speaking the same language. Partnership meant something very different, particularly in this space of diversity. So I heard Jerry and Danny mention very specific demographics that are important to them based on what is happening in the tech industry. And so reaching those populations is of paramount interest to them when they're on a campus. I, as a Career Center director, would have been like, but you have to recruit all my students because that is my obligation as a career services institution. But as Jerry or Danny or Adrian, I was looking for a really specific population, and I wanted you to help me craft an individualized strategy that was going to help me accomplish my goals at your institution. Those things ultimately are going for the same aim, right? The same outcome. We ultimately want students to find great opportunities and to advance. We want underrepresented communities to be fully represented. But the way we approach that may be different. And so I would offer in the notion of partnership, right, that we put that on the table, that we be honest about the fact that we may be coming at this from slightly different perspectives. But if we're honest about that, we can find the points of commonality with our Career Center partners and think about the full network of the university as an opportunity to meet our goals. It's really going to look different for every employer, for every organization that you work with. But I really think if we put that out there and have the honest conversation about that, we can absolutely find a place of partnership. I've often seen that when you don't, we go around each other. We will find the students, believe that. We will absolutely find the students, but it's better if we have the open dialogue and we do that together.
Jerry.
If I may, Adrian, I just really, I'm glad you called that out, because in our examples, we did kind of double click on Black and Latinx. However, our interest is much broader, and it is absolutely the inclusion of especially the diversity of thought, because we especially are very much focused on innovation. So who are the great minds that we're going to bring in, and focusing on that diversity as well. We do have some demographic challenges, so that's our starting point, but multifaceted. And so, you know, I don't want to overlook the LGBTQ community, for example. We are in Pride Month. I want to think about that. So all of these aspects of inclusion are what help us to be, you know, more robust in our creativity and innovation. So, Adrian, I'm glad you called that out, because I didn't want to be remiss. But again, when we started with our data, we were like, wow, here's our biggest gaps. So in our multi-year strategy, that's our first click of focusing there.
So thank you. Go ahead, Adrian, what were you going to say?
I think we're probably doing the same thing when we think about students with differing abilities and the ways we connect on your campuses for those communities. I know we're being really inclusive in our thought about that. And together, I think we can build the strategies that help us get there.
So one of the things I want to play devil's advocate for a second, because I know that many of my colleagues are thinking this. When I hear, targeting demographics, okay, I'm neither agreeing nor disagreeing. However, a rebuttal to that would be, we don't want to put our students in a situation where they're not going to be able to grow and thrive and be promoted and appreciated for their differences, particularly if students like them, early career students of their demographics aren't there already. So we don't want to maybe present them as a checkbox, a diversity checkbox, which I know that all of you had mentioned in, prior to beginning this conversation. So how would you address that from a career services perspective? How would you balance the two?
So I'll just jump in since I started this interesting conversation, since I opened the door. I'll step in on this one and just start with a few thoughts. So one, I love the notion that you want to protect your students from being a checkbox. I think that is beautiful, right? The notion that we want to make sure that our students are valued wherever they go and the experiences that they have. I love the role that career services is thinking about playing in that. I also loved listening to the student panel and hearing them say some of the things that they are looking for and how they want organizations to show up and how they're looking for that as they think about who they want to learn with and grow with and develop their careers with. So I would offer, do that same research, right? Look into organizations beyond what we might say as we represent ourselves. We are here because we care, right? Employers that are willing to go above and beyond the recruitment activity should start to show you something, but look into us. Where are we investing our time? Where are we investing our human resources? Where are we investing our financial resources? What do our cultures say on our websites? Check with your alumni who are in our organizations to see what they say about who we are at our core. If we really mean what we say, we shouldn't be worried about you doing any of those things and our ability to show up well. If we aren't doing what we say, we might have some concerns, but you'll be able to decipher wheat from chaff and understand who's showing up well in this space.
Yeah. The reason we send our young people to school, to university, is so that they can learn to think. And the best thing you can do for your students is to help them make good decisions, to be discerning, as opposed to shielding them from those experiences.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say that I love it when companies don't get it.
More for us.
More talent for us.
Yes.
That get it. And Adrian, I couldn't agree with you more. These students, man, they need to just do their research because, I think selfishly, all of us don't want them to also, be in a company where they're not going to thrive. And selfishly, personally, I wouldn't want a student, regardless of, the dimension of diversity, to end up in one of those companies. So, I love what you said, Adrian. It's so important. And, there's a competition that's going on, right? To ensure that students can grow, can thrive, can be a culture. I mean, when I think about, for example, our ERGs, we have 13 different dimensions of employee resource groups where whether you're Asian or Black or, you're part of, Generation X, or we even have one called interfaith. So regardless of, the dimension of religion or faith that you have, you could feel as though, this is an organization where you thrive and you can meet your full potential. And so that's the idea too. It's not, necessarily that, yes, we have goals because we have, underrepresented populations that we know we want to, to be representative of our customers and of our communities. But we really want all to be able to, live up to their full potential.
Thank you. And we're running out of time. Movell, I'm going to start with you for this next question. So what I would ask is, let's do a lightning round, okay? And we'll try to see if we can, knock out the last question. So, so when we think about the future, okay? So the future from now, 3 to 5 years from now, what do each of you see as the most challenging issue pertaining to DEI that organizations will need to address in order to foster more inclusive workplaces? Okay, and so if we can just go very quickly, round robin, starting with Movell.
I'm just going to start at the basics. It's getting comfortable with having conversation, particularly around race, because we steer away from having the conversations and we label conversations as difficult. And when we do that, I don't know about anybody else, but if someone says to me, this is going to be difficult, I'm going to try and get out of doing that as much as possible, right? So I think we need to start at the basics and start cultivating spaces where we can have conversations around DEI, but particularly around race, because that's the place where we seem to struggle the most, and having open and honest conversations. So that, if we're talking quickly, that's the basic for me.
Adrian?
So I would just add the notion of consequential accountability, right? That we find ways to have accountability that has consequences, that we don't just say we're going to do something, but that there is a consequence if we do it. Consequences can be positive, right? And they can be negative. And so whether the consequence is a reward and visibility for leaders who are leaning in and making an impact and showing themselves as advocates in this space, or the consequence of not leaning in, not meeting the goals, and showing yourself not to be the right leader for an organization, that there have to be consequences to our commitments in this space.
And I'd go with focusing on progress, not perfection. More often than not, when you have a lofty ambition, people will say, well, there's no way we can do that, and so I'm just going to toss it. But if your incremental progress will get you to that ultimate ambition. So don't worry about perfection. Let's go for progress.
Well, I'll go next. I think, we have to address the fundamental issue of human bias. It's one that, weaves itself through everything that we do and has broad implications, particularly within our workforce. And, I think about the only thing to really address, systemic inequity is systemic education and systemic empathy. And I think we really have to tackle that to get to the issue.
So I get to go last, and I will shamelessly say something that Adrian said. I'm not going to come up with anything new or innovative. She said, change systems, not people, because you will drive yourself crazy. And so if you really do want to see long-lasting, sustained change, biggest challenge is making sure that you change the systems and not the people, and that you pace yourself, or you will burn out and you'll be selling flowers on the side of the road on the Garden State Parkway or something. So that's what I would say.
But I'm gonna just add one thing, Lance. You might need to change some people. So don't discount that. There may be a few players that need to move on.
Gotta go.
Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists today for joining us. Thank you so much to our attendees. I think the last question, the insights that you relayed, pretty much encapsulates today, right? We're having the difficult conversations. We are, being accountable by showing up today. And I hope that we made a little bit of progress, or that we are making a little bit of progress through hearing from each of you and engaging in the conversation. So up next is a 10-minute break, folks, and then we're going to come back and close out the conference with our closing speaker, Bob Athwell from Skyscanner. We'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be back with you as we enter the home stretch of our conference. And what I'd like to do is just take a moment to acknowledge all the panelists. I think the insights and perspectives that have been shared with us today have just been remarkable. And I hope that all the participants are seeing the value in that. I also want to take a moment to thank the incredible team here at Northeastern. You'll hear more about them later, who were really instrumental across several different departments in bringing this program together for you. It's my great honor and pleasure, I must say, to introduce our closing speaker. I know you've seen Bob Atwall's credentials, so to speak, in his bio in our program. Bob currently serves as the global lead for racial diversity, employer brand, and early careers at Skyscanner. Skyscanner is based in the UK and London, but has offices and branches throughout the world, including in the US. I think to give Bob's title does not do justice to him. Bob has been involved in a number of ventures, both in higher education, where he's led career organizations, in industry, where he served as a recruiter, an HR manager, and done completed different roles in marketing and so forth. But I just want to share with you that Bob is one of the most passionate and committed professionals to the issues of social mobility and to leveling the playing field for learners everywhere. So I'm delighted that he was able to accept our invitation to be our closing speaker for this conference, because Bob is not only a tremendous professional, but also a very dear and close friend. So I was delighted to introduce him. And Bob, if I may, I'm going to turn it over to you to bring our conference to a close.
Thanks, Manny, and good afternoon, evening. I'm just trying to get my time zones right. So I'm also in London. I wasn't alone. This is normally pub time, but we thought it would be an absolute pleasure and privilege to be with you today, so the pub can wait. And Manny, thank you very much, obviously, and all your colleagues and your team at Northeastern, who have very kindly helped me get myself organised to speak to you all. So I'm basically going to talk to you for about 20 minutes. And then I think there may be some opportunity for some questions, but if there are questions, feel free, I'm sure, to put in the chat. Simana was very helpful in kind of making sure that I set some context around what would be most helpful for all of you in terms of what I do as a day job and what I see more broadly globally. So as Maddie said, my day job is at Skyscanner. We're the travel company that cares about you. So if you haven't used us or you haven't seen us, please do. We are a comparison website. Think of Expedia, Trivago, and the likes, but we're better. We serve 100 million customers a month, active customers a month. We're global, and we're very well liked by our travellers. They appreciate how we kind of ensure that we put them first in everything we do. Of course, the pandemic around the world has meant that it has slowed down a little bit for us, but there are real encouraging signs, and the world is moving. And what we do know from the data we see is that actually the world wants to move and the world wants to travel. And travel matters, really, and it's really important because from a DEI and belonging perspective, which I'll talk about, travel is really everybody. The world belongs to us and proud. But actually my role is really focused around sorry, I don't know that one. Sorry, Alexa's now cutting in on my conversation. My role is really about racial diversity and what does that actually mean? And I'm just going to pick up on a number of different conversations. I've been present throughout the whole day today, and I've listened right the way from Carl, from the student presenters, and also what our employer panel colleagues. And actually everything I'm going to say is probably a repeat, but I'm just going to give you my flavour and my view on it. And so DEI and belonging, and the E for me is about equity, and I think Carl laboured that point at the start of the conference. So why racial diversity? What does that actually mean from a Skyscanner perspective? Well, after George Floyd, like many organisations, we just basically stopped, looked at ourselves and just recognised that we had to be better and we had to do better. And I think, you know, the point that Adrian made around system, you know, changing the system is really, really important. It's such an important factor, because what's happened historically, systemically, the system hasn't changed. And so what I'd like to kind of just remind us is, well, when we talk about this language, when we use this language, what do we actually mean? Now, different people will have different perspectives, and that's okay too, because that's cognitive diversity, and we want that, we recognise that. But for me, the output of this is about creating belonging, and the belonging of true inclusion means the feeling that you're wholly able to be yourself, psychologically safe, and that's what belonging is, and belonging for all under the inclusion family. And inclusion really is around different identities feeling and being valued and welcomed in all spaces and situations. And diversity is the difference of identity. For example, ethnicity, race, religion, nationality, sexual orientation, etc. And equity recognises that not all individuals experience things the same, and thus we must remove this to their participation that may exist. So just because I've got a ticket to the dance doesn't mean I'm going to enjoy myself or I'm going to feel like I belong. And I think that's really, really important. So in the next sort of 15 minutes or so, what I'm going to talk you through is my story that plays out around the world. We're a global business. I'm based in the UK. We have offices in the Americas, out of Miami. We have offices in central continental Europe, Barcelona, Budapest in Hungary, and in Sofia in Bulgaria, and across into Singapore, Japan, and across the Asia Pacific Rim. So we work globally. Our customers are globally. Our employee base is globally. We have over 75 nationalities that work in our organisation. So I'm going to draw a lot upon that, but I'm also going to draw a lot upon my other roles. As Manny said, I've worked in higher education. I've worked in a number of organisations that you'd probably recognise in terms of brands. And I've been very lucky to be focused for a number of years on trying to level the playing field for students. So my views are my own, so, you know, please feel free to quote me. These are my views, my observations, my reflections. But what I really want to talk you through is authenticity, and I'm going to ask you a number of questions for you to really think about. That if you're a student, ask yourself, do you really connect with your students, your colleagues, your peers, your prospective, your employee, to understand how that feels. So optics versus action. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I got. And again, I want to sort of again pose to you, are you part of the solution or the problem? And so again, please do reflect on that. And then really talk to you around culture and this notion of fit. And so who are you measuring against? When you talk about your culture, you say, you know, it's about whether you fit in the culture. What that really draws upon is a deficit model. And so again, my PhD is in social mobility. It's about the hidden talent pool. And what I draw upon in my own research is that I think McKinsey all for very narrow talent. And so I don't really want to kind of talk about the notion that, you know, there's talent and it's really competitive and we're all fighting for the same people. Well, that is the issue, and that's what's happened. And so for me, the system piece is about the systemic issue that we have to solve, and we've just got to be really clear. And I know there's a couple, I think Movell mentioned it around conversations. My thoughts on that is I totally agree, but I also think that you're just going to have to get comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. That's just the reality of it. But in order to do that, we're going to need to think about how we redesign our futures we will become obsolete. And when I say we will become obsolete, is we are at a step change moment. I think Maddie said that at the start, where we have this opportunity to really change the dial and move in a different direction. And so that's kind of what I'm going to cover and hopefully bring it to life in terms of my perspective. So why now? Why suddenly are we at this step change moment? Well, I'm just going to walk you through my own life in terms of timeline, or memories, should I say. And so the late 70s and 80s, early 90s, you know, we've seen tragedy, we've seen hope, and we've seen politics, good and bad, around the world. And some of those reference points, you know, if we look at the tragedy and the hope, the sort of oil crisis in the 70s, the kind of hardship of the economies globally, the apartheid movement in South Africa, but we also started to see in other areas emergence of key icons and professional sports colleagues start to kind of break barriers. You know, black soccer players, you know, black musicians that were on the top of the charts for a number of weeks, breaking into different barriers. And so there were a number of trailblazers and icons. Literature was always one, but they were really starting to come through thick and fast in those days. Okay. And that's a function, I think, particularly from my point of view. And at some points there's real joy, real anger, and real outrage. And then I think fast forward a few decades, and then we had this thing called Brexit in the UK, which really divided and tried to set out about a divide and conquer piece. And I would, and this is no political statement, by the way, but I saw the same happen with Trump in the US around that divisions. It's not a political thing. It was just the fact that there was this division happening. It wasn't just in the UK and the US. There was the rise occurring across most of Europe as well in terms of far right views and re-emergence. And so this whole thing was starting to be about divide and conquer. And then George Floyd happened. And so that moment is here, and that moment is here for us to take. And what we really don't want to do is waste the opportunity. And again, Carl mentioned Professor Kennedy's work around how we become anti-racist. And I think the point about being anti-racist, and this is the work that I've been leading on in our organisation and across different businesses and colleagues that I've been talking to, is you've got to understand what do we mean by being anti-racist. And so there are 4 ways, in my view, that you break it down, that I think a number of people have kind of portrayed this. So these aren't my words, by the way. So I think when you look at what does anti-racist cultures mean, it means having racial awareness, it means having racial diversity, it means looking at racist behaviours, and it means having racial inclusion and those barriers. So what do we mean about racial awareness? A culture where all members know how not how to identify and challenge racism. Racial diversity is really around a culture where all races are fairly represented. And racist behaviour is a culture free from racial microaggressions, racial harassment, racial jokes, and racial discrimination. And racial inclusion in terms of barriers is where a culture where race is not a barrier to feeling included. I won't mention the names, you can check it out on LinkedIn. Every organisation I've ever worked in, including the institutions of higher education, I have come across racism. There is no doubt about that. Was I immune or passive to it? Parts of it, yes, I regret it. And I think my aha moment was really that, why is it when I've got into senior positions, whether it's in colleges or in corporates, to let me come through? Because I've spent all of my career helping students and really been focused on that. But actually, if I look at my own profession, there's just not enough of people like me. At the same time, though, we can't be this homogenous group, so you can't put us all together. What we do have is similarities in lived experiences. And so, again, how I explain this to my colleagues in the UK is when I'm talking to them in the UK and also in the US is that I'm of Indian heritage. My parents are from the Punjab in the northern part of India. I grew up here in the UK. I was born here in the UK. My parents came here to help rebuild the country after the Second World War, like many people. And actually, the idea of me being sort of one or the other is not. I'm both, and I appreciate it. When I say I'm both my parents are Indian, but I'm both British and I'm from Indian heritage, and I appreciate both my cultures, and I love both my cultures, and I think that's really, really important. But actually, growing up, sometimes you will find that people will want to pick on you because you're different. And so in all of these organizations that I've worked in, I've tried to explain that some of us now, when things like going to a restaurant or bar or something like that, it's just instinctive in me to scan that place or that establishment to think, without even broadcasting this to peers, even when I'm in the States, is this a place that I'm going to get into trouble because of the colour of my skin? I play a little game with myself when I walk around different parts of the world, and I've travelled a lot. And when you walk in different parts of the world, I count how many times someone's going to cross a road because they see me coming and I'm a different colour. I've also then experimented when I've watched black males walk down the street and see how many people cross the road. And I think to myself often, what do you think we're going to do? Rob you of your decency? Because basically the media's portrayed that if somebody is of a particular colour, they're dangerous. And that is the issue about systemic racism. And so we've got to move away from that. And a colleague of mine put it very eloquently. The key difference between being non-racist and anti-racist for me, and I'm reading my colleague's words, is really being proactive and really sometimes putting yourself at risk. Giving something up, whether that's your time, your resources, your relationships, to take on the struggle around racism as if it was your own. Because this step change is not going to happen without allyship. And you can't keep asking Black, Indigenous, people of colour to basically pick up the battle and the fight. So when we talk about white privilege, we're not talking about hardship of socioeconomic status of individuals. We're saying that actually there is some commonality, absolutely. But what we're saying is, when you walk into a place, your colour gives you access and privilege that I just will never get. And that's the issue. And that's why allies are really important, because in different parts of the world, the context is slightly different, but the socioeconomic status struggle is real. And that doesn't mean that you have to apply the same lens in all parts of the world, because you have to look at the geography that you operate in. So let me put some context, and again, I'm using the UK because it's a marketplace that I think one of the things Simona wanted me to do was give you some context of different parts of the world. But the UK, there's something like 12-13% of us that are non-white. So actually the pool you're drawing from 65, 66 million people is always going to be 12-13%. So actually the point, I think somebody made it earlier on around, trying to play this numbers game and trying to kind of objectify stuff. You've got to look at what's available to you. The most important thing though is really understanding, are there inherent biases or obstacles in the way? And if they are, how do we remove them? And how do we get people, i.e. allies, to help us remove them? Because one of the things that I hope you all agree, is that when you have these obstacles in your way, when you just think about the conversation that's happened during the last 12-15 months or so, and there have been, of course, George Floyd is the moment, I believe, but Black Lives Matter has been a thing for a number of years. It got basically hijacked by people, and all lives matter and everything else came out. But the point that I think people are missing here is, who is the most qualified to talk about all of this stuff? Well, I would put Black men and women at the top. I would put other people of colour, Indigenous people there. I would say white women. I would say then literally anybody else. And then I would say white men are probably the least qualified to talk about this subject matter. And the reason I say that is because actually if you flip that around, who's most likely to change racist minds? I would put white men at top, I'd put white women second, I would put other indigenous and people of colour third, and I would say black men and women at the bottom. And the reason I say that is if you think about that systemic struggle that has been going on for years, it's not decades, you're talking centuries around the world, and we're a snapshot in time. And so when you want to change the conversation, allyship is absolutely critical, and that's where we need our allies and ensure that they come out for us across all the inclusion umbrella, but particularly around the agenda, because black people, people of colour, you know, we work obviously very closely. It was the National Indigenous Peoples Day in Canada only the other day, and we do a lot of work in different parts of the world where obviously indigenous cultures have been absolutely marginalised, you know, through colonisation and post-colonisation, etc., etc. But where you have all of these injustices that have occurred over the world, the system is not designed to support, which is why allyship is so critical to move this gender forward, which is why being anti-racist is so important. And I think if I was to summarise everything that we've heard today, I'm saying nothing new than what any of our speakers have said. But let me just talk to you about the optics and the data and everything else. Data is absolutely key about understanding where you are and then trying to map progress appropriately based on your pools and everything available. How do you grow those pools? Absolutely critical. But actually, we've got to do it in a way that is built on solid foundations, that is sustainable, so that in generations' time, they look at this moment and realise we did actually do something decent with our time on this planet and move this agenda forward so that there is no more suffering in years to come. And I think that's absolutely key. We will not win this fight, and it is a fight, and I'm not talking about a physical fight, this fight to change people's minds, to give people an understanding of what it feels like to have a lived experience that is similar but also very nuanced and different, and what it feels like every day when you have to worry about things that some people will never even have to think twice about. And so my questions again back to you at the start was, what are you? Are you part of the solution or are you part of the problem? So whilst you think about that, thoughts I'd leave you with, and we talked a lot about microaggressions. One of the students was so articulate. I mean, in fact, all those students were amazing, by the way. But I think the student that was saying around, you know, meaningful action being implemented, you know, those microaggressions and, you know, microaggressions, they occur across, again, the whole DEI spectrum. And it's really important if we want to get to belonging that we get this bit right. So the amount of times that people say to me and others, you're so articulate, you know, and it kind of says, well, you know, what do you mean? Oh, you speak really good English. Well, I was born here. I was born in the UK. You know, I went to school. No, but you speak so good. You speak so well. You're so articulate. You know, where are you from? You know, I'm from Birmingham. Where's Birmingham? No. Where are you really from? You know, and so these microaggressions just kind of, you know, what you don't realise is when you're not confident and you've got imposter syndrome, and it is rife amongst many of us, is these things really start to bug you and eat at you, and then it limits and prohibits you. You know, and so it's really important that you ask yourself, how often have you been involved in that situation, and what is it you do going forward matters. You know, the classic, you people, what do you mean by that? You know, oh, you're all right, Bob, it's the rest of them. Oh, okay, what do you mean? You know, your name's so hard to pronounce, I'm just going to call you Robert. Actually, my name's not Robert, and if it was Robert, I'd tell you it's Robert. So, you know, why don't you educate yourself and try to think about how to pronounce my name? And if you're still not sure, why don't you ask me and I'll try and help you? And so the notion of moving this conversation forward, the one thing that I think our speakers all spoke about today was this point about, yes, we can call out, but actually we've got to call people in first. We've got to create those safe spaces to move this conversation forward. And what I mean by that is give people the benefit of doubt, help them to understand what is acceptable and what is not. And I think that's what we've got to do. And that's really, really important. So my final thoughts for you is think about it again. Are you part of the solution, or are you going to be part of the problem? And I would hope that you are part of the solution, and I hope that you recognise that across the world there are different things happening, but this struggle is real, this struggle is important, and it needs to change. And so thank you, thanks for your time. I hope I've tried to give you some flavour of what's going on in different parts of the world, from the US, but particularly around the work of racial diversity and all the work that our colleagues are doing. Thank you.
Hi, it's Bob Blanchett again. Sorry for the pause. I got caught up reading the meeting chats. Bob, thank you so much for kind of bringing us back at the end the way you did. It was just a wonderful, you left it on a wonderful note. It wasn't a closing, it was a kind of a beginning, kind of a call to action. So I know it resonated with me. I'm sure it resonated with everyone that's attending the conference today. So I have the pleasure and the best job that one could have in this conference is to thank everybody who helped put this together. And it begins in our organization, like a lot of you spoke about today, it begins at the absolute top. So I'd like to thank President Ayoun for his vision and his call to action. I'd like to also thank Chancellor Henderson for his leadership in this area, and in our own leadership in our own department. First and foremost, Manny and Chuck for their general support and guidance through all of this and putting this together. It really took all of us, and couldn't have done it without your support and guidance. I kind of feel a little bit like I'm the music is running in my ears and I'm accepting an Academy Award, but there are a lot of people to thank, and I apologize if I missed somebody, I really do. But I really wanted to send a very special thank you to our colleagues in the Office of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion. They were our partners on this event, and I really do appreciate the efforts of Anthony and Carl. Thank you very, very much. I'd also like to call out and special shout out and thank you to our colleague Becky Collette for all of her marketing and creative expertise, who made all of this and all of the promotion around it better than we ever could have made it without her. So thank you, Becky. Another thank you I'd like to shout out to Ryan Bender. Ryan from the Chancellor's Office. Ryan, thank you so much for all of your technical help and your technical consultation. This has all been a learning curve for a lot of us putting this event on, and we couldn't have done it without you, Ryan. So thank you very much. I'd like to also say a special thank you to Jennifer Shire from our Corey College of Computer Science, Computer and Information Science. Jennifer was a wonderful supporter, and behind the scenes, through her efforts, we were able to secure a couple of our panelists today. So again, Jennifer, we couldn't have done this without you as well. And I'd like to slow it down just for a second and really thank the production team that made this go off seamlessly through a lot of hard work and behind the scenes, even today, running as fast as they could. And that team was led by my teammate, Lara Peterson, supported by the co-producer, Nikki Long, with help from Kelsey Zapana. So thank you so much. None of this would have happened absolutely without you. And last but not least, I'd like to thank the person who has really been our North Star with all of this and who really shepherded this conference to fruition today. And we really couldn't have done it at all without our leader, Sumana Northover. So thank you, a very heartfelt thank you to Sumana. Appreciate all your efforts and all you've done in this space. I would say, please take notice of that last slide and please engage with us. That's what we want to do. We want to help you and we want to help ourselves and help our students. So have a great afternoon, rest of the evening to you. Thank you very much.